Welcome to the Upside Podcast, powered by Upside Global and hosted by Julian Blinn, founder and CEO of Upside Global. The Upside Podcast is listened to weekly by over 6,000 sports and tech executives from all sports leagues and teams in the United States and around the world. Julian has been developing technologies for professional sports teams for over 10 years and has worked for major tech companies along with sports tech startups. In each episode, Julian interviews global leaders in sports to share knowledge on emerging technology in the sports industry and how these technologies can help improve the performance of individuals and organizations, both on and off the playing field. And now here's your host, Julian Blinn.
So today we have the honor of interviewing a group of MLB practitioners that are experts in mental performance and preparation. So I'm going to do some quick introductions around the table. So first we have Lindsay Shaw, who's the Director of Sports Psychology for the Guardians and MLB team. So Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Julian.
Great, it's great to have you here. And then we have Zach Brendan, who is the Head of Mental Performance and Coach Development for the Arizona Diamondbacks and MLB team. So Zach, welcome to the show as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Julian.
Yeah, great. It's great to have you as well. And then we have Josh Kozuch, who is the mental performance coach for the Baltimore Orioles and MLB team. So Josh, welcome to the show as well.
Thanks, Julian. Excited to be here.
Great. It's great to have you as well. So, hey, I'll just jump into the first question because we have a lot to cover. So this first question about the evolution of mental performance in the MLB. So from your perspective, how has the approach to mental performance evolved across the MLB over the past 5 to 10 years? And what are the biggest cultural shifts that you've seen inside the clubhouses? Anybody wants to start?
I'll take it from here. This is now my third organization in Major League Baseball in the last 10 years. And I've seen a lot of different things, organization to organization and across just culturally. I'd say some of the biggest things that I've noticed so far is just a willingness of players and an understanding of what it is. They have experience coming from college at this point, or they have somebody that they worked with in high school. So you're not necessarily starting from ground zero with a lot of these concepts when players are originally drafted. And then by the time they get to the major leagues, they have a pretty good foundation of a lot of these skills and tools that we're able to talk about. Another thing that I've noticed as well, just shifting the last couple of years, is the amount of understanding that coaches have as well. They're reading a lot of books. They're listening to a lot of the same podcasts. They're doing a lot of mental performance work themselves to help them become better coaches as well. So we're not the only experts in the field when it comes to our organizations. And how do you leverage those experiences? How do you leverage the expertise of the coaches, their time? A lot of them have played for many years at a very high level. So how do you kind of marry that and get the best from our players? So I'd say like those are two things. So the last one I'd add that I've noticed a change in is just the willingness to have a role like this. Most teams have departments at this point. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. And it's, for me, been really cool to see, because you get into this field and you don't know what's going to happen or how it's going to evolve. And it's been awesome to see teams invest in this and then also see it in other sports as well. So I'd say that's three things that I've kind of seen over the last 10 years.
And Josh, would you say now that all the MLB team have a mental performance department today? Is that a fair assessment? Or?
I think that's fair. If not one person for the whole organization, multiple. So I'm not exactly sure, but I'm pretty 95% sure of that.
I mean, that's what I meant. At least one person, right?
Yeah.
Department, but at least
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Josh. Zach, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
I think Josh hit on a lot of the main ones that came to mind for me too. I think being involved in the draft process for the last 4 or 5 years for our organization, it's increasingly common for players to come into the organization with some prior experience as it relates to mental skills, not only from the amateur level, but also from other teams too. So I think that's something that, to Josh's point, I think the increased understanding and access to information around mental performance and mindset, it's kind of at an all-time high. And so I think this kind of leads to the second part of your question, which is also how I think our roles have shifted. I almost view our role at times as that of quality control.
Mhm.
Helping ensure that the information that our players and our coaches and our staff are tapping into is, either evidence informed, it's grounded in solid principles, things that are also tailored in a way to them or help them find ways to tailor it to them. I think that's another big shift that probably started maybe beyond the 5-year mark and in other areas too, but like the game's very player in driven at this time, like I think we provide a lot of we put a big emphasis on individualization and providing a lot of resources and a lot of spaces kind of a la carte for guys. And I think that's becoming increasingly common. I think the one other shift that I would add that's kind of tied into that is the resources or the circle around players extend beyond just what we have in our internal organization. I think you're seeing increasingly more players having specialized coaches, technical coaches, strength coaches, mental coaches,
Mhm.
variety of different resources. And I think in a lot of ways it's great. We've tried to build off of those relationships with players and get a better understanding of what they're tapping into, and just kind of be an extension of that in whatever way. Like I kind of tell players, like I try to remove my own personal ego that you don't have to work with me, but I do want to make sure that you work with somebody who can help you, especially if that's an area you want to tap into. So I think those are pieces that I've also seen as little nuances that seem like they've taken off in the last however many years.
Yeah, so it's moving in the right direction, right? They're very, they're very supportive of it. It sounds like, also the MLB team. So, and would you say that mental preparation, that's for everybody, right? Would you say mental preparation is very important in baseball, in the MLB?
Yeah. I mean, I would offer, I mean, I've only been working in MLB for, I think, 5 seasons now. Prior to that, I was with the Olympic Committee for about a decade, and I wasn't assigned to baseball specifically. But I think baseball has a very long history, like a multi-decade history of having mental performance practitioners or having sports psychologists involved, particularly at the major league level. Like so for the Guardians specifically, that one of my predecessors was there for like 30 years. So and I think inherent in that, there's this recognition that it's really hard to hit and it's really hard to pitch, and the season is really long, so it makes sense to have an expert to support the players and the coaches as they get through the season.
And I'm sure that because you got so many games, right? In the NBA, you only have 82 games, but you got way more
Yeah.
games. So you could get mentally fatigued, right?
Correct.
Right. And so that makes sense. And maybe Zach or Josh, you have any thoughts on that as well? On the importance of mental preparation?
Yeah, I mean, it is important. I think also with baseball, there's so much data involved with it. If you saw some of the reports that are given to coaches and players before a game, being able to filter that and go out there and play and step into the batter's box or step onto the mound and not have all these numbers running through your head, like, oh, this guy chases sliders in this count X amount % of the time. Well, you also have to be able to go out there and compete. So that preparation piece of how do I take all of this information, create a plan for it for myself, and be able to go out there and compete. That's where we spend a lot of time, not only as mental performance coaches, but working with the pitching coaches, the hitting coaches, the managers, everybody that's involved. So when you talk mental preparation, it's not just a mental performance thing that's a part of this. It's how are we collaborating with the rest of the staff to take this information, take previous performances, and get guys to just go out there and compete. I would say that's how I've kind of talked about preparation with our guys and our teams in the past.
Right, makes sense. Any other comments before I move on to the next question?
I think
No?
just one thing I would add with Lindsay and Josh is that recognition of the increase, like all of these things put together, the demands of the season and the more information and more data, like just adds to the cognitive load that our players are experiencing over the course of a long season. The other side of it, though, that makes baseball kind of unique is it's considered what's kind of be like considered a competition-based sport. In other words, like our guys are having to train and compete on the same day. And I think that's one of the nuances that our sport creates from a variety of levels, especially from a mental preparation standpoint. Like I think we've also seen a shift in, maybe the last 5-10 years in terms of the physical skill training and physical skill development and just being more adaptable, increasing variability, all those different things. And with that though, too, it's part of it is when 6:40 or 7:10 or whatever time the game starts on a given night, like how do you help ensure that players are confident, clear-minded, as Josh kind of talked about. So I think all of that kind of comes into now one of the things that makes baseball so unique compared to some other sports when it comes to the mental side.
Yeah. And I'll
Yeah.
just add, I mean, the failure rate too, like, again, just to focus on hitting, like, imagine if your 3-point percentage, your success percentage was, 30%. And if you're batting 300, you're one of the best hitters in the league. So
Yeah.
there's also this interesting thing to be like, among the best of the best, but to be failing constantly. And I mean, slumps are normal, but to like ride that fine line of like knowing how to hit, knowing how to prepare, how to hit well, and know that you're gonna fail 3/4 of the time, usually.
That's a good point. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's part of the game, right? To accept that you're not going to hit all those balls, right? So, next question I want to ask you guys is about mental preparation techniques. So, what are the most effective mental preparation techniques? And I've seen like things like breath work, visualization. I was watching a video from the Chicago White Sox, I think, just last week. What are the techniques that players are using today to manage performance, anxiety, maintain focus, and recover from setbacks during the long season, right? For example, if you look at a player like Soto, right, from the Mets, like everybody's talking about him, like, look, you got that big contract. I feel like there's a ton of pressure on him right now. So does it make sense?
Yeah, I'll start, and I would say it most definitely makes sense. And I think, on one hand, there's a variety of different kind of cardinal mental skills, tools, and things that we use internally here. I know other teams do. I always tell other people, like, tend to be a bit of an open book in terms of things that we're doing, because I promise you we're not inventing any new mental skills over here. We're doing breath work, we're talking about routines, we're talking about and doing meditation and helping players get aligned with their values and build kind of a more robust identity and just some different concepts as it relates to that. I think the couple of things though that I would add in terms of techniques is it kind of goes to what Josh was raising earlier with the increase in data and everything. I think part of our role in helping players, it's not so much, I guess, a technique, is helping them understand like how to like quiet some of the noise. They don't necessarily need more techniques or more tools to all of a sudden be implemented. Sometimes it's about how do we simplify what you're doing so that way you can really kind of focus on one thing and find that one thing that works for you. So I think part of our role with players is that deliberate subtraction and just kind of helping them, not do more per se, but just do what matters a little more consistently. And then the other thing too, that's something big that we've tried to build a foundation around is what we kind of call mental practice. So it's one thing to know the mental game and to know what the mental skills are. It's another thing to practice it, and it's another thing to train it. There's a colleague, a woman who's been in our field for a few decades now and done some amazing work. And one of the comments she shared one time is like, sport is not a multiple choice test. Just because the answers, the different mental skills and things that are needed, like that there can still be a gap between knowing and doing. And so I think we do try to put an emphasis on that. And then the last bit with that is I think it's one thing to train mental skills with an individual in isolation. And then I think it's another thing to create a training environment or a culture that also promotes those mental skills. And I think, we have these different phases of the year and different levels are can be a little bit different. It's one thing to do it at the minor league level versus at the major league level, but at different times of the year, trying to just create some opportunities to interweave mental skills training into other other pieces, and also have other pieces, whether it's strength and conditioning or sport coaches, etc., kind of build off of that. So for us, I think all this, getting to your question around are there techniques, most definitely. I think where there can be nuances is how they're implemented, how they're trained, and excited to hear how Josh and Lindsay use it in their organization.
Yep, thank you, Zach.
Agree with everything Zach's saying, and very similar approaches for us as well. One thing that I think is important to mention with this too is just all of those ideas that Zach mentioned. Like sometimes it takes years to be able to implement some of that stuff at teams and organizations, because it may be new, because there may be previous history, because there's just challenges that arise with so many people that are involved within an organization, not only at the major league level, but when it comes to player development and trying to create a system where players have an understanding of these tools and skills, so that when they're drafted to getting into the major leagues, they have a back to that foundation piece that I was talking about. You have farm directors, you have coordinators, you have coaches, you have players, like there's so many, there you have agents and moms and dads and all these things. And so these things take time to be able to implement. That being said, I think you can. And I think that's where I would say, like, where I've had some success over the years is creating, I guess, curriculums for the overall system. So when a player is drafted, he's going to the Florida Gulf Coast League. They have a foundation of mental skills that they're learning there. And then as they progress, it's almost like teaching in a way, right? Where, you go from first grade to second grade to third grade. The caveat that I'll add with that, right, is if a player's ready to advance to the next level, we're not going to hold them back because he didn't cover the mental skills frameworks that he needed to by the end of July. So as mental performance coaches, you got to sometimes speed things up player to player. And that's where the nuance comes in with our work. Is you can create these curriculums, you can have all this stuff in place, but at the end of the day, sometimes you have to just individualize a lot of this coaching. So that's where I'd say that, yes, we do all these skills, but it's individualized, it's player to player. There's not necessarily that cookie cutter approach. It's great to have veterans that have experience to talk with the younger players. It's great to have coaches. So there's so many different ways to do this. And I hate to just say that, but it's true, right? And that's just kind of been my experience to this point.
And I would think that it's got to be customizable, right? You can't just apply the same thing for everybody. And some players they don't want to be, doing certain things, right? They don't say, I'm not going to do this. I don't have confidence, Is that right?
Yeah, that's accurate. The other piece that I'll add to this as well is once guys get to the major league level, they're obviously really good, right? They wouldn't have gotten there without having mental skills. Maybe they didn't know that's what they were using. Maybe they didn't know they were visualizing. Maybe they didn't know that they were setting intentions each day. Part of our job is to be able to pull that out. So we're not necessarily always force feeding, like, oh, you need to do this, you need to breathe, you need to visualize, you need to ground, you need to go in cold tubs. What do you already do well? What are skills that you've done, and how can we leverage some of those experiences when you're going out there and performing in those pressure environments? So not always force feeding, more so pulling out from players. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind for our work too.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I think some of what Zach and Josh have touched on. So, there's, again, many decades of research in applied sports psychology. And I think, Julian, your question was about, like, what are the research validated, like, skills? And I would say that's kind of analogous to, like, when someone, I don't know, has UCL repair, what are the training exercises that you would do to strengthen the arm? And those are all really important, and certain players will need certain things based on their biology and the way things tore and, the projection of the rehab. So we have really good data around what skills are founded in research and that can help athletes enhance their performance or gain more control, more ability to perform on command. But as Josh was kind of alluding to, and Zach, you touched on this, so we can look at skills as individual components, or we can think about it, particularly as you get, like, to AAA and as you get to the major leagues, you kind of have a philosophy, just like these guys at this point. I mean, some of them are young and they're still kind of developing what is the philosophy of how they take care of their body. And there's, there's like prehab and rehab and recovery. There's all sorts of stuff that they're doing. And so it's similar on the mental side. So there may be specific things that they need to do to prepare themselves, against a specific opponent, like something in their history against this hit, against that pitcher in that stadium, or, I'm coming off of an illness and I'm depleted, or I'm a little bit under rested because this other thing happened. Like, so you want to help the player develop a philosophy of how they kind of like tune into their nervous system, tune into their body, tune into their mind, and then make sure they have the skills to execute. And so that is being proactive. So maybe they haven't been in this scenario before. So you have to help them forecast the demand. Like, okay, you're going back to this stadium. You're going to face this hitter. So let's think together about what it's going to be like in your mind so that you clarify how you want to prepare. Because in the moment, and I know this has been alluded to, in the moment, we don't want a lot of like chatter of thinking and planning. We want you just executing the motor skills. I mean, yeah, okay, you have to be able to stay with yourself and use your cues or be able to communicate, but we don't want a lot of thinking in the moment of like motor action.
Yeah, and so you made a good comment about motor skills, right? And having an injury, right? So I actually meant to ask you this too. Like what I've heard many times, the teams that, you have a guy who's got an ACL injury, right? ACL, he's coming back from an injury, and they mostly work on motor skills. But what they're kind of missing is to work on the cognitive skills, because, when they got an injury, they're a bit more apprehensive. Are they going to hit the same, right? So are you guys, when you have a guy who's coming back from an injury like ACL, are you also really focusing on the cognitive skills as well, not just the motor skill, which is what an athletic trainer would do, or performance director, right? Love to get your take on that.
Yeah, we're working together with the training staff and the strength staffs to put together plans for guys when they return from injuries. A common one in baseball is the UCL with Tommy John, and that's a 12 to 16 months, sometimes more injury. So you kind of break it down into different phases, right? Where it's like post-surgery, what's those first couple months look like? That's where it helps to have the athletic trainers and the strength coaches in those meetings and talking about like, here's what to expect, here's what it looks like. From the mental side, here are some things that we can work on. And then as you get closer to return to throw, what does that process look like? What are skills that we can work on from the mental side? It's just a very holistic approach to rehab. And this isn't just for Tommy John, it's for any injury. But I think like having it broken up into sort of phases before ultimately returning to play, and then that fear of re-injury and those types of things, I think breaking it up and being able to tackle the challenges that these guys are going to be faced with is important throughout that process. But I think that's actually a really important piece of our work is working with those injured players.
But I feel like the more I'm listening to you guys, I feel like mental preparation, because I talked to the NBA, NHL team, and I feel like in the MLB, it's so important, even more so than other sports. That's my kind of what I'm, my impression right now. But
I think it can be. I mean, I think it kind of depends on it. I mean, okay, so as Josh is alluding to, there's for pitchers, there's sometimes if they're having a surgical intervention, there's a really long rehab. So, and I mean, like ACL would be a pretty long rehab. Of course, players can sustain injuries that resolve more rapidly. I think a couple things come up. So, let's say like in the midst of a longer rehab, there's different things that a team can do. There's different things that an athlete can do to stay connected to their sport, right? Because they have this like real separation from this thing that they love. And like, there's like, they feel like sad and lonely and anxious and, they have all of this. So there's ways that you can like kind of remain connected to that. So like you can do things like visualization, you can watch videos. No, some guys don't want to do that, right? They're irritated, they got injured, it makes them angry and they don't want to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But as I think, Julian, what you're alluding to, as you're getting closer to returning to play, you want to be approximating the demands, like the mental demands, the cognitive demands, the visual demands of what you're actually going to be facing when you're out there playing. So when I was at the Olympic Committee, we kind of realized that when rugby players were returning, they're sitting and they're watching, but they're seated. So we started doing things like putting them on a bike with a heart rate monitor, approximating, their whatever the heart rate intensity, the zones that they would probably be like. This was in 7, so they were sprinting a lot, and then watching games or doing other cognitive tasks like doing multi-object tracking training, which is obviously relevant to rugby, potentially less relevant to baseball. But we were trying to simulate things because like players would return to play and be like, oh my gosh, I can't see the game, right? Like there's too much happening. So I mean, in hockey, there's ways that you can there's simulations that you can do to have a guy like learn to track the puck, right? Or learn to, forecast where is it going. And in baseball, we have like in the major league, we have these like fancy machines that that can put out pitches that are the same speed and have the same movement.
Yeah.
Right. So, so you can have like a batter, maybe he's not ready to move, maybe he's not ready to swing because he has an injury, but you can put him there to train his eyes, even though it's like 400 milliseconds, it's hard to actually see. And then to start train his mind of like, okay, this is kind of what it's like. This is what I would do. Would I swing? Would I hold off? Right. Because you don't want to have his body perfectly ready and then have this gap of an untrained mind in a trained body returning to play. I mean, you'll unsurprisingly encounter performance obstacles with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that. Any other comment before I move on to your next question? Yeah.
I just want to add one thing to that. I think what Lindsay mentioned is the simulation is so valuable, and I love the example she drew from some other sports. One thing I would add is, so it was really cool. This actually happened recently. One of our minor league middle coaches. Now, granted, we have a distinct advantage compared to some teams because our ACL, our lowest kind of league and domestic league here, and our rehab is located where our major league stadium is. But we took a group of our players over and they watched the game. They sat down beforehand. We gave them like scouting reports and everything, and we were like having them evaluate the game and review it live, and then we like debriefed it or whatever. And like I think those are things that it helps kind of help with that transition back in, as Lindsay mentioned. And we've actually seen this even on an individual level too, of just there's been, and I'll just share these because there's been public stories that have come out per se, but we've had a couple of players go through some high or lengthier rehab processes, and they would go sit with one of our pro scouts for every game and just talk through the game and just learn some of the nuances and kind of increase some of that aptitude. And I think this ties back to your initial question, Julian, which was around just what are some of those like mental performance techniques and things that are valuable. I think it's also important to not lose sight of like sometimes the best tools are the conversations. And an example happened previously for me where like, or one example that where a player was like, hey, Zach, can we come in? Like, or can I come in a little bit later? I want to do like 5 to 8 minutes of some breath work and just kind of like slow down a little bit. And he comes in and he starts talking about, some of the stressors and anxiousness and different things that he was kind of encountering. And we ended up talking for like 20, 30 minutes. And by the end of it, he like, you could notice like there was a shift in how he was feeling, like what he was thinking, all that. And he was like, hey, we don't have to do the breathing. And I was like, do you want to know a secret? And he was like, he like leaned in, and I was like, it's not always about the breathing. Like sometimes like you just need somebody to like kind of unload or like kind of release some of the mental tension and weight you're carrying. So I think it's important just to not lose sight of sometimes the best tools are the conversations. So all of us are kind of walking interventions as well.
That's a great point. Yeah. And just from my own knowledge, right? So let's say you have a player who's doing like breathing exercise like every week. Like how many times a week would you recommend is doing it? And for how many times? Like 10 minutes? Like can you give me a sense of what you guys typically recommend for breathing techniques and maybe visualization, which is different, which I'm not an expert in this. So
I can do breathing. Okay, many years ago, I included this topic on my dissertation. So when we're recommending breathing interventions to players, we're recommending them to regulate the nervous system such that you're engaging the parasympathetic branch. There's different breathing techniques, and they're for different purposes. But for when we're suggesting breathing, we're saying, okay, let's do breathings to activate sort of the parasympathetic branch such that, that sympathetic, like fight, flight, go fast. It activates really fast. So we want to train them to like rest, digest, recover, repair. And generally you want a 10-second breath cycle. So it would be like 6 breaths a minute. And we suggest that it's about 4 or 5 seconds in and about 5 or 6 seconds out. Now, if you have a really tall pitcher or a really big guy and they have a really big lung volume, it would be something like 5 breaths per minute. But the goal there really is to like ramp down the nervous system. And the sort of the best data when this specific technique that I'm talking about came over from they were training Russian astronauts, like how to stay calm. And when you're going to space, like it's probably gonna be pretty stressful in the nervous system. The intervention was 2 sessions of 20 minutes per day. Now that a lot of athletes don't have, like a lot of regular people don't have that. Now that, that experimental protocol of like 2 sessions of 20 minutes a day will change people who have like clinical conditions, COPD, who generalized anxiety disorder. There's interventions for women during pregnancy. Like, so people who have like medical issues that need intervention. For performance optimization, there's actually really good data too of this two times 20 minutes. But the truth is like, who has an extra 40 minutes? So what we try to do is we abbreviate it, right? And I mean, everyone can do 5 to 10 minutes at night when they're in their bed, when they're scrolling. And once you learn the skill, so we'll show them. So the goal is that you're breathing such that the heart rate increases on the inhale and the heart rate decreases on the exhale. And that's what activates the parasympathetic response. You're kind of like toning the vagal nerve that connects the heart and the brain. Okay, so more is better. But once you get sophisticated with it, it's not that you have to be like about to step in the box or pitchers get 20 seconds between pitches. Like, it's not that like you're doing your 2 breaths. It's know that you've toned this vagal nerve so frequently that you can take a breath and on the exhale, you kind of like ride it out and your heart rate decelerates and that calms the nervous system. So we're really particular about that. That doesn't mean that guys don't use other techniques, but if you're going to devote your time to breathing or if you're going to devote really your time to anything, our philosophy is we want to make sure that there's good research backing. So that's on the breathing front.
Yeah. And many times I feel like those apps that people recommend, there's not much, studies or research behind it, right?
Yeah, it's like this military guy that did this thing, and or this person likes it, and that's totally fine. And if a player has something, Zach, you're alluding to this, like if a player has a guy or a player has a thing, and that makes him feel good, and he genuinely either there is something that's happening, or there's just this other phenomena, like a placebo phenomena, then he should use that. And if it's working for him, great. But if you want something that, I'm an applied, research science, practitioner, like if you want something that actually rests on data, then this is what we recommend.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, and we'll get into the question later, the last question about the different types of technology that are coming on the market. And I got some thoughts on that. And I'm actually looking to, you mentioned the vagal nerve. There's devices you can actually really put on your vagal nerve to kind of shut it down, right? I haven't tried those, but I've heard people saying it's amazing, right? I don't know. So we talked, I think, Josh, you talked about the fact that you need to get to individualize the mental performance strategies, right, for different players. So my question to you guys is, do you have to do it, of course, for different players, but also depending on if you have a veteran versus a rookie, a reliever versus a starter, a guy from Latin America versus an American-born player? How do you guys do it based on those different, variations, I guess?
I think one thing that's helped is, yes, you have to find what works for each person. But I think when you have a meeting with the group, you give a conversation about a gross topic, or you give a short story with a question for guys to think about after. And then you have those follow-up conversations and you start to figure out what works for guys, or you start to ask them questions such as like, what's been your biggest success, or what's been your favorite failure to this point? Or you just start to engage with them on the mental side, but also on the human side as well, right? Like, hey, you're coming over here from the Diamondbacks. I know that Zach's there. What were you guys working on? What were some of the things that resonated with you in your time with them? Or you're coming from the Guardians, like, you'd kind of do some homework on the mental side or on our side before guys get there. So you just have that understanding of who they are and where they come from. Or, hey, I know you went to University of Texas. Like, talk to me about that experience. So it's our job to kind of uncover some of those things. When I mentioned earlier, like pulling out from them, the questions that we ask, how we ask them, I think is a really important part of this. Humble curiosity is, I think, a really important skill to have as a mental performance coach. Just genuinely curious about human beings. And I think when you start to see where guys are at, you start to say, hey, like, let's go chat on the field today. Or, I've done this before where you grab a guy and a hitter and you just take him out and stand in the batter's box. And you say, just take me through, like, what's your thought process when you're in the box right now? And they start talking, and then you realize, like, oh, hey, maybe this would be a good opportunity to work on that breath. Maybe when you're on deck, we can do a little bit of visualization. So it's a little bit of just like kind of detective work, I guess, in a way, right? Like you're piecing together these clues that players and coaches are giving you, and I don't want to use the word diagnose. There's probably a better term for that. But you're kind of giving them ideas and tools to be able to use as well. So I think it's just conversation, paying attention, observing how guys perform, seeing how they do when they have failure, when they have success, and being able to have those open conversations. Sometimes they're not at the field as well. So I think, like, just constantly altering our approaches, but ultimately doing so in a way that's best for each person and not best for me or the coaches. Like, what's going to help this guy in this moment?
I think it's smart, right? You kind of do some, not background check, but if you come from another team and you happen to know the practitioner, you can get some information, right? I think it makes complete sense. And I wish, like, most of and maybe some teams do that, right? For not just for mental stuff, but they use, like, I don't know, like a device to sleep management or whatever it is, right? Or an AMS platform that they used before. But it's good that you guys are doing that. So maybe Lindsay or Zach, any thoughts on that as well?
I think well, one thing I would say is I liked what Josh shared about the individualization coming through the question asking. Like, I think that's really powerful, because I think we know that there are some, as Lindsay noted earlier, there are some evidence-based techniques and different tools and things that are really beneficial, but how each guy uses them or incorporates them or brings them into their own performance has some nuance. I'll talk, I guess, a couple about nuances, I think, within it. Most of my experience has been at the major league level, and one thing that I've noticed that Josh kind of alluded to was there are some guys I've learned that are comfortable speaking in public and some that are not. And I think there's that nuance. And I think that's where, like, the art of our work comes into play. Like, I've had guys where behind a closed door, I feel like I had a really good relationship with them. And I would maybe pose an open question that had nothing necessarily to do with a conversation that we had privately, but something pertaining to mental performance with guys around, and they shut down and they don't speak. And I'm like, ooh, okay, I got it. This is, maybe I need to be sensitive to where we're having these conversations. So I've made some mistakes that way too. But I think that's one thing that you have to kind of be sensitive to. I think when it comes to, like, veterans and rookies or younger players, like, we're, as an organization, we value homegrown players. It's one of the things that I think is really important to our success, and it's one of the things that we value a lot, is, like, as players come up through our system, they hopefully are building that foundation. And I know sometimes that's building good relationships and doing great work with our other mental performance coaches on staff. So as they get up to the big leagues, we want to try to continue to be extensions of that, and also make it so too that they don't lose that connection either. There's times where, at least in our instance, where our other mental performance team that isn't maybe with our major league team every day, like I might be, they still pop in and make appearances. And part of that is to continue those relationships and just give players a different voice, a different perspective. It's like when, a parent says one thing over and over again, and then the coach comes up and says it, it's like, that was exactly what I was saying, but it's a different voice and it resonates at a different level. So I think that's one way that we approach kind of the younger players is hopefully doing our best to kind of build a foundation and just build as they continue to transition levels. But with veterans, the other thing I would add is like the challenges mentally and emotionally that they face start to evolve. I remember having a conversation with a player, and I was asking him a pretty general, open-ended mental skills kind of conversation about like, hey, what's helped you kind of learn to leave each day behind and let go, to the next day.
Yeah.
And his answer was so like quick and straightforward. He was like, having a kid. Like that's been like the difference maker, like coming home. And like, so you bring all that in some ways can be just a wonderful blessing for some of our players. It also can create challenges too, because for example, like if you're a player that's up and down between the big leagues and AAA, there's a lot of strain potentially being put on your family. You're away from your kids, like you're chasing your dream. This and at this level, it is a business. Like this is your livelihood. Like this isn't just I'm doing this just for fun. Like no, I am doing this to put food on the table and support my family. And just some of those conversations start to look a little bit different. And I guess just the part that I've really come to appreciate and enjoy is like there are guys now that have gotten to the big leagues where I'm like, we were there when they were drafted. And so it's been really kind of fun to see that growth. Yeah. And also to know that there have been some cycles along the way. It's like, hey, like we've been here before, and like let's circle back. And sometimes that's the role I think we play too, is being professional reminders for guys, because I think I've noticed for me mistakes that I've made has been more in the form of telling instead of asking questions and helping kind of remind guys of things that they once said and just being really good at listening. So I've had plenty of failures that way. So anyway, that's kind of how the approach has evolved too.
No, great feedback. But thank you, Zach. Maybe Lindsay, any thoughts as well?
I was just gonna like try to touch on a little bit of U.S. specifically. A third of the league is Latin, and certainly within our organization, it's much greater percentage. Obviously, coming out of the Dominican, Arizona, like low A, high A. So who works with who? I mean, we're pretty aware. So players will have like their own like personal or familial biases with the idea of like anything mental. Like I'm a sports psychologist, right? So like the fact that I'm a psychologist, some guys don't, they don't want to talk to me. But my colleagues, maybe people on our team, like they're mental performance practitioners too. Like, so someone's going to have like their own bias of whether they want to talk or not. There may be something that has nothing to do with my professional training, but just something that, I try to be friendly and, like quick, like maybe a guy enjoys that and then wants to start talking about what's going on in his mind. There are certainly players who, they've been burned in the past. They're just not comfortable with the idea. They don't want to talk to someone with like mental or psychology, in their title in the organization. So what we try to do, like I'll take this role, will be sort of in a meeting, and different coaches and services providers are kind of talking about what's going on with a guy, like what's, from their level of expertise or from their lens, like what are they noticing? And I'll take like a consulting role there. Like clearly I have no relationship with the guy, but all the things that you're talking about, it sounds like, whatever, he doesn't have the ability to organize this thing inside of him. So he needs more external support. So let's see how we can take that role for him to, like, he's really good at baseball and he needs this kind of help. And it's our job to sort of, to sort of tailor that for him so he can be successful, because that benefits the org.
That makes sense. Now, before I get into the last two questions, I want to ask you, is there any kind of success stories, right? When you start working with a player and using mental technique and really help them as far as performance? I give an example. It's not an example with a team, more of a player. I remember Tony Parker was talking about how he asked Kobe Bryant, hey, every time I start a basketball game, if I miss my first 3 throws or the first basket, I go like downhill. And then Kobe said, I go like this, delete. And actually, after he used that, Tony Parker was like, that changed my career. So it's not baseball, but, it was an interesting, I think, story in basketball. So any success stories that you guys have come across with players?
One that comes to mind for me was a few years ago. I was working a lot with AAA players, and guys were going up and down between the big leagues and AAA, and that's a really, really tough group or tough transition to constantly be making, especially the way that major league teams use their rosters and try to maximize the whole 40-man side of things. And I heard this from a vet who had been in the league for 15, maybe 20 years, which is also rare. And I asked him, I said, what allowed you to have the career that you had? And he said, I stopped thinking about wanting to stay each time I got called up, and I started to focus on, I'm going to be here. I'm going to have a 10-year career. And what do I need to do to have a 10-year career? So I used that story and I shared it with the guys who were going back and forth. And instead of just thinking like, I have to stay today, or when I get that next call up, I have to get 2 homers, or I have, instead of having to do that, it was just like, think about the longevity of your career. What do you need to do to give yourself a chance to have that 10-year career? So it stopped focusing so much on that pressure that guys were putting. I understand it, right? Like, you want to go up there, you want to stay. That's what you work your entire life for. But having this idea of, I'm going to do this for 10 years. What do I need to do? The team believes in me. I believe in myself. And getting guys to try to reframe it in that light was a success story that I think I had. But it wouldn't have happened without that conversation with the veteran and leaning on that guy's experience. So I always love to pull stories from guys who have been there, done that. I didn't play in the big leagues. These guys are the ones that have the experience. So the more that you can pull stories like that, I always find that those have led to some of the more successful, I guess, mental performance experiences that I've had so far. So that's one that just comes to mind.
It's like saying that, stop focusing on the outcome or the result, but just thinking about what you got to do to get the outcome, right?
Right. And easier said than done, right? Like, you're talking millions of dollars, you're talking about families, and like Zach said, you're trying to put food on the table. Like, totally understand all of that. You don't want to go back to the minor leagues where the food's not as good, the bus trip, like all that. I get it. But if you can focus on those things, or try to limit as much thinking about getting sent down, well, you're going to at least give yourself a better chance to have success. And at the end of the day, I think that's all we can ask for from guys.
Yeah, great insights. Yeah.
They're like, you're touching on like human beings. So you have to do something, and you can either like choose to do it, or you can allow yourself to feel forced to do it. Right. So like I have the opportunity to play versus like, if I have this opportunity, or I don't know, it's more of like, I need to, I have to, you feel so constrained, right? So there's things that you can do with your language, as you were saying before, Zach, like you can free guys up to help like shift them a little bit. And then it frees it. Now I'm opting into this. Like, our starting pitchers, they're terrified. I mean, sometimes, right? Like you feel that in your nerves. It's terrifying. Like, what if I go out there and it's not going well and I can't re-regulate it? And like this is a nightmare. And then you okay, that maybe has happened in the past. Like it could happen, but like, are you choosing to work with yourself to see what you can make happen? Like, are you staying like, really well connected to the catcher? Like, how are you viewing the hitter? Like a guy who's going to rob you of your dreams, or a guy that you're taking his dreams away from him, right? Like, there's ways that you can play around with language and, conceptualizations that can really shift someone into just like sort of tapping into their potential. But Julian, I'm like laughing at you. So in the comment, there is this in the world of sleep, and I love sleep and sleep monitoring and sleep interventions. There's actually this scale, and it's called the dysfunctional beliefs about sleep scale, because there's sleep medicine practitioners notice that like people have these kind of like kooky beliefs about sleep. If I don't go to sleep tonight, I'm gonna get sick tomorrow. If I can't sleep my best, I'm not gonna play my best. If I this, then that. And you're just kind of like, okay, there's a kernel of truth in there. Like all paranoias kind of have like a kernel of truth in there. So you can't say, no, you'll never get sick, but you have to shift it to like, no, on average, if you're well rested, you're a healthy person, your immune system gonna do its job. Like, yeah, you'll sometimes get sick. Like on average, when you're well rested, you'll play to your average ability. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have above average performances and below average performances. But so this idea constraining, if I missed my first free throw, or if I like a pitcher, I don't strike out my first batter, then it's over. Like, so there's a fundamental error in the attribution there. Like, it's just false. So if you're talking to a player and you can get them to like kind of share their thing, like their totally like erroneous idea, and you don't want to, like I have like my machete out and I'm cutting people down. Like I wouldn't act that way in a real conversation. I would say like, oh, okay, so like let's get our data people, or if they're younger and there's not a lot of data, like let's come up. I want you to list out every game in the last 2 years where you've missed your first free throw. Okay. And then I want you to list out every game where you've made it. And then you start to have them like actually like her, and then they realize like, no, this is just like this is a belief that doesn't serve me. Maybe there was a game where you missed that first free throw and then you got in your head and you're doing something else. It wasn't the act of missing the free throw. It is what happened next. It's that you then now you're like dismantling your ability to shoot, and you're thinking and you're monitoring and all this stuff. And of course you can't shoot well. Like you experts, there's all sorts of like neuroimaging studies. Experts in thinking, and I'm not talking about like staying plugged into yourself using cues, but I'm talking about overthinking, surveying yourself, monitoring, checking. Am I doing it? Is this like that? And expertise are totally incompatible. And when you start to convey that to athletes, they're like, okay, yeah, I get you. Now, the stopping of doing it is another thing altogether, but it's so fun to get into the mind of an athlete and understand where do you have this error in your thinking, and how can we work together to just free you up so you don't have to be constrained by that. It's too much pressure. That's your first free throw of every single game. You've got to like, what is that, the gateway to you to be able to like, you've been shooting basketballs for 20 years and now you're gonna let it, like, that's crazy.
But that's probably how he functioned before he met Kobe, and Kobe said, you got to delete. And he was a game changer for him, but he was kind of sabotaging himself. Every time, so I miss the three throws, I'm gonna have a bad game. Why are you thinking that way? Hey, last two questions. Well, we kind of talk about the integration, working with other departments, right? Other colleagues, but so how are teams integrating mental performance into overall performance departments, or mentor coaches working closely with strength coaches, analysts, and the medical staff? And you mentioned let's pull the data, right? Let's look at the data. What you just say, is that true? Yes or no? I mean, how do you guys, you talk about the ACL injury, and you have to work, I guess, with your rehabilitation department, work on the cognitive skills. I mean, how is that integration with other departments working for you guys? Anybody?
I'll start. I think, I think the notion of more interdisciplinary, models and things across a whole range of different disciplines has continued to grow and evolve. I think one thing that I still wonder how much like true integration truly happens. I think there's still probably some room to grow. I think one thing that is always a challenge is like how do you be integrated versus adjacent, and being kind of like actually interwoven. So I think part of that starts with just integration in the form of presence and like being involved in different things. So part of that, like, for example, in the past, like we've had meetings on a day-to-day basis to review like the pitching the night before, and we go through each guy and we talk about like what we saw and like been involved in those things, and also involved in, okay, well, what's the action steps as well from this? Like, how are we tackling this? And this might not necessarily be a directive just to us as the mental performance coach, but it also might be how can we collectively, like, who in this room or at this table has the best relationship or the best opportunity to ensure that this message lands with the players. So to me, I think that's one form of integration that we've kind of worked towards, if you will. I think part of that too is just trying to work towards at least a little more of a shared language across the organization. I think that's still challenging because there's still some terms that are very embedded that are going to be hard to shift, if you will. So we try to also kind of meet people where they're at. But I think like you're seeing an increase in integration in a lot of ways where, like, you're seeing mental coaches in dugouts, you're seeing them involved in these core meetings, you're seeing them around like different parts of training and in the medical, like just in all these different pieces. There's a coach that I've worked with, a strength coach in the past, where we've talked a little bit about, like, we always joke that we play a game of, for those that know basketball, like we play a game of like pick and roll a little bit, where like sometimes, like, whether it's in the weight room or out on the field, he'll like kind of just give me a little like nod, or like he'll say something like, hey, this might be a guy to like check in with or whatever. And it's kind of like his way of like dishing an assist. And I think trying to, reciprocate that in different ways while also, protecting confidentiality and different things like that. But just trying to understand, again, I try to remove my ego in a lot of ways where it's like, it doesn't have to be me that quote unquote scores. I like giving assists and I like creating opportunities to work to and through our coaches and our staff. And so that's one. And then the last one I'll add is we've been fortunate in the last 3 or 4 years with some of the coaches that we have where like in some of our routine team meetings, for example, we play a small part in that in terms of like sharing different messaging, creating, taking themes and things that players are talking about, coaches are talking about, and interweaving them through stories and principles that just kind of are these little doses and drops of messaging around the mental game. So that way it's more about like frequency than anything. So that's another way. So we've tried to do more of that versus being an add-on to their like two routines. Because I think as guys get up higher levels, that's a tough sell in my experience.
So you have to be flexible, right? There's not one side does not fit all, right? Cannot be flexible in that sense. But thank you, Zach. Maybe Josh or Lindsay, do you have any thoughts on that?
Zach, you made an interesting point there that I thought is something to elaborate a little bit further on. I agree with it's not about us, right? It's not about my ego or anybody's ego to do this. But I also think we have to be given the access to some of these things, right? Like if there are meetings that are happening and they're like, well, we don't really need the mental performance in this one. I've seen that. I've been a part of those in the past where there are hitters meetings or pitchers meetings, or this is back a few years, but that makes it really tough to integrate. So your decision makers at organizations, whether it's your GMs, your AGMs, your managers, your head coaches, they have to be on board with this because we can bring these ideas, but if they're like, no, we don't need that, we don't want that, it makes it really challenging to get fully integrated with some of this stuff. So if you don't have the buy-in from those key decision makers, it's really tough to do some of this work. How I'm integrated here with the Orioles is just I'm housed in our performance department. So I'm a part of our strength and conditioning, our nutrition, and we have meetings, and that's a part of things. What's also interesting is my locker is next to our field staff coaches. So yes, I'm in that department, but I spend my time in the locker room with our coaches. So I'm kind of everywhere. That being said, like there's times where I miss things, right? Because I'm spending time in the locker room with the third base coach or the first base, whoever the coaches are. And I don't go to the training room or I'm not in the weight room because things are just so spread out. So it's great to be integrated and you're everywhere, but it's also, I have to be mindful, or we have to be mindful at times of like where you're spending your time. And if you're spending it sometimes too much with one area and not another, whether maybe I'm always in the pitching meetings, I'm never in the hitting, like I'm just using it as an example. So I think we have to constantly audit our time when it comes to this integration piece as well, because there are so many little meetings that are taking places, things that are happening over the course of a day, a series, a season. And those are just some of the things that I think are important when it comes to this mental performance work. Is yes, you can be integrated with one area, but don't forget about these ones. Don't forget about that one or this conversation. And it's like, well, you to do this work effectively, I think you kind of have to try to be everywhere all the time. But every organization is different how it's set up. When I was with Tampa, where was I housed? I wasn't a part of the performance department at the beginning, and then I was with the coaches. So every org is just different how it's set up. I don't know what's best, but I do think it's important to, as a mental performance coach or sports psychology, like you have to be proactive in a lot of that integration as well. So that's kind of my thoughts on this.
No, great points. Yeah, that makes sense. Lindsay, do you have any thoughts on that question as well?
I mean, just like we're a small mid-market team, right? So the Guardians can't afford to like purchase a lot of talent. So we're sort of obsessed with this idea of like, how do we move the needle with every player? So we have these big meetings with coaches and other, sports science disciplines, mental performance, sports psychology, where everyone's super focused on like, okay, what's the goal for this player? How are we going to get it done? How, what's the evidence that we're going to use? How do we keep them engaged? So we're kind of get like obsessively focused on doing that. And to Josh's point, like we happen to have, we have sort of a larger staff. Brian Miles is our major league mental performance coach. He's with the guys, he's with the major league team all the time, kind of some similarities to what you were describing, Josh. And then that kind of cascades throughout the other levels of the organization.
That's great.
I just want to comment because I totally agree with what Josh was saying about needing to be involved in kind of some of those conversations, and it reminds me because I think I've had prior experiences, not even through our organization, but in other spaces where like I think it's a reminder that who you have at the table is a representation of what you value. Questions that you ask is a representation of what you value. So if you don't have mental performance coaches involved in player discussions or conversations that end up creating things around mental skills or mindset or whatever thing, it might be a reflection of how much you value it. And I think so it kind of echoes to what Josh talked about is like, I think that's where those in leadership roles who have a voice in terms of who also is at the table. And it's also our responsibility to be earning that as well. But I think the people at the table and the questions or lack thereof being asked reflects what's valued.
Makes sense. Yeah. Hey, last question. So, we work with lots of technology companies, right? There's a lot of modalities, right? These days, you've got those applications to help you do the breath work. You've got the device, like I mentioned, to shut down your vagus nerve. I mean, you've got VR training system. There's so many modalities out there, right? So, but what do you think is going to be the future of mental skills training in the MLB moving forward? Any kind of predictions on that?
I don't know. I think AI is obviously going to be a part somehow. I don't want to talk us out of jobs, but I wouldn't be shocked if there's some sort of bot that's created where it's like, hey, let me just message this thing and now I don't have to talk to a person. And I mean, like, we don't need mental performance coaches because we can just ask this bot something. So maybe that's something.
No, people want to talk to people.
I agree, but I don't know.
The efficacy of text therapy. Like when you have a problem or you need something, maybe in the privacy of your Google search, you're looking at, but ultimately you want to talk to a person. Human beings are relational. I hear what you're saying. I think obviously technology, like we're launching into this new era, is going to totally transform things. Then it transforms the way we work. But people want to talk to people. Like, do you want to be coached by a camera? No, you want a guy with you to say, do this, not that. Yes, good job. Keep it up. Like people want to interact with people.
Like just like, when some guys came up with this robotic massage table. Well, guess where it's great, but they want to talk to the guy when they're getting a massage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Talking to a robot. Probably not going to talk to you.
And I mean, there's, you have these sensory pathways when you touch, like it activates all like these hormones and like there's stuff that happens when you're with a human being.
I agree. I'm just saying I wouldn't be shocked if I see something like that come out or a team is like, you know what, we got this bot, we're good. And it would be really unfortunate. But I'm just saying I wouldn't be shocked if I saw that in the future of this work.
I think, well, I have a part to play, but I think to your Lindsay's point, you can have human element on top of it.
For sure.
In some ways, right?
I mean, that's happening, right? So in medicine, they have like AI note takers, and there's like, they miss humor. They miss, like the bantery stuff in the summaries. I mean, I've been thinking about, is there something that I'm constrained by my own mind and my own experience. I'm imagining that I could be sitting with a player and we could come up with an idea of like, what do we think's going on and like why, and what's the most like research backed ways to like move through this or blah, blah, like what other factors? I mean, sure. Could I ask some sort of like AI assistant? Like, what am I missing? Like survey the literature, publications for professional level athletes in in sports with like fast moving objects, like, cricket, ice hockey, baseball, like blah, 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 ask some sort of informed question. And of course, there's going to be something that's been published and I'm not familiar with that is perhaps worth moving into the conversation. So, I mean, I think it can be a supplement at times, hopefully.
I think it's gonna make you more productive, maybe, automate some tasks, but you're still gonna have to deal with humans.
Mhm.
Yeah, the idea of like 60% of those jobs will be gone. I mean, come on, some jobs will be gone, but not all the jobs.
Correct.
So, but anyway, Zach, do you have any thoughts on that as well? The evolution.
Well, first off, I hope I don't lose my job to a machine. There could be,
Same.
to Josh's point, it's like, my fear I agree with Lindsay. I think it's the human connection is irreplaceable. I think it's Simon Sinek who has a quote around like, there's no such thing as like digital trust. Like trust needs to be formed like in person and everything. I believe that. My fear though is going to have to get bad in order for it to like circle back. Like sometimes like those types of, it's so new, it's so shiny. I think a lot of people are interested in trying it out in different ways. So I'm kind of curious to see at what point does it tip maybe back to that. That's one though. I don't know. My initial response to this question was the same as Josh's. I have no idea what the trend is going. I will say, and maybe this is just internal. It's also interesting because I think if you would have surveyed me for the last 7 years that I've now been in, I probably would give a different answer each year. Like this is a little bit, what's the flavor right now? What I would say to that is, to Josh's point earlier, of like that feeling of like having to be everywhere and try to be a resource and service to everyone is really difficult. I at least have not done that very well, and I've struggled with that in my own kind of career. I'm curious if we see an evolution where the mental performance coach is less viewed as the coach that delivers direct services to individuals and plays more of a multiplier, facilitative role through the environment. In other words, working to and through coaches again, to kind of be extensions of us. And as we just know, like, yes, the individual and their own makeup and their own everything that goes into that plays certainly a big role in performance. But we also know that the environment shapes that dramatically as well. And I think just when you think about trying to find multipliers or amplifiers within an organization, I feel like the coaches, at least in our experience, have kind of been a shift for us in trying to do that. And so I don't know if that's going to be a trend or if that's just personalized to us, but I would be curious to see, because I think what he mentioned as one of the challenges, I don't think that we're alone in experiencing that either.
Makes sense. Any final comments?
Yeah, I guess, Julian, I mean, I read your newsletter, right? I'm always interested in like looking at new tech and like trying to like categorize, okay, is this a sort of like a passive thing, like something that's going to modulate the activity of the vagal nerve, like at base, and the player just sort of passively receiving like transcranial DC stim, or is it something it's modifying something such that the player can do a different kind of training? So some NFL teams have these like rooms where you can project like the other team on the screen, and you can slow things down and guys can move around. So I mean, we don't have the cash flow right now to create a room, but starting pitchers and managing that, right? Because it's this whole different level of sensory experience moving from AAA to the major leagues in a major league stadium. Maybe your first start is in Yankee Stadium, and there's this different intensity. So is there a way that we can use technology so the player can be exposed to the stimulus, like the reference of exposure therapy, graded therapy, where you can then learn to regulate in response to the exposure, and you're working with yourself differently. I mean, I also really love the idea, and I don't know if this exists yet, but like, actually, like we used to have like an to watch, and it was like measuring like movement and like stillness, and if you were still, you were kind of, and it was night, you were kind of maybe asleep, but not too still because you took it off. and that's evolved to like bracelets and rings, and and now sensors are measuring like oxygen saturation and body position, and there's different things that can listen to your snoring and all sorts of stuff, heart rate average, heart rate variability, all this stuff, sleep staging. I mean, one of the things that our players come up against is like they like to sleep at a different temperature than their bed partner. And I mean, as you're as you're moving through your nighttime recovery and different stages of sleep, your core body temperature does different things, right? Like, could someone make this really cool mattress that's responsive to body temperatures and change things up? And is that something that is actually comfortable? I mean, I'm really excited about just changes in technology and how that can help athletes optimize themselves and prolong their careers by enhancing recovery.
What's on that? So you mentioned I think we're talking about the NFL, like the VR training system, like Tom Brady and other, like the quarterback from the Commanders, Daniels. Yes. He can read every single defense because he already know how they're gonna play. Tom Brady, I think, was doing old school, like he would study every single play.
Right. Well, and he's like on a TV screen, right? Yeah. Like with his like VCR tapes back in the day. And I mean, so there are individual factors. So some people have the ability to take stuff on a 2D screen and they can make it real in their mind, right? Yeah. And they can rehearse the timing. They can put it into their body so well. And perhaps Tom Brady had that ability. But putting it in front of you and being able to move in accordance with what's happening or communicate with your teammates, and you have the rehearsals. I mean, I think it just enhances a team's or the individual and the team's chances of actually doing the thing when it counts at real time, and increases their ability to be successful in what they're trying to do.
But I've seen one that had a VR training system for baseball. They built it like many years ago. Yeah, I talked to them many years ago. They already built it, and they can actually look at biometric data in real time as you're batting with this virtual bat, right? Actually, it's a real bat, but there's been already a VR system for baseball, as far as I know. And I think you mentioned something else too. I forgot, but it's going to come back. But yeah, there's a lot of modalities. Like the guy that built the VR training system for the quarterback for the Commanders, they built it back at LSU. And I actually know the guy, Jack, the guy we helped to build it with the German company who built the VR training system. So I think it's definitely coming to a point where there's a lot of modalities, but you have to see how it's going to fit into the workflow. There's a cost, of course, a cost element, but I think teams are getting more and more smarter and smarter about using the technology that can help you. When you get to the game, right? You're not Tom Brady. Not everybody can be Tom Brady. But when you get to the game, you're already comfortable. You know what they're going to do, right? And I think we're moving in that direction.
And I'll circle back to what I said before about failure. I mean, there's a system in baseball where like you can get extra reps, and sometimes guys are like, I don't want to do that because I don't want to have the experience of failing before I get out there. Like I need to remind myself that I am competent and that I can do this. So like, I don't want to be exposed to my 70% failure rate. I'm cool. Like I'll just stick with 90 to 100% because that will help me. Right. And so, I mean, to your point, there's practical realities, there's workflow realities, and then there's like the personal reality of, do they actually want to do it?
And sometimes, if there's too much data to the player, it's going to be like, hey, just go and play.
Correct.
Like, don't worry about this environment or trying to recreate the environment. Like, too much data. Like, I was talking to a guy called Abdul Sila. I worked with Serena Williams for 10 years. He's big on performance, mental preparation. He said, I don't like too much data. I'm old school. I don't want to have those guys to overthink, okay, now they got all the collection of data when they're playing tennis. I don't want that.
No. Because
then they're becoming lazy. They don't want to do certain things because the sensors tell them, hey, he's getting fatigued. Right. So they don't want that. So I think having too much technology, sometimes it's not a good thing, right? So you want to kind of take a step back. But anyway, hey guys, we're at the end of the podcast, but I want to thank you for your time today and great conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Julian.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Guys. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To access past episodes and other research, articles, and analysis of sports technology, please visit our website, theupside.us. Subscribe to the Upside newsletter and receive full access to our sports tech business letter and website. Royalty-free music is provided by ibaudio.com. The Upside podcast provides timely insights and interviews with global leaders in sports technology. Until next time, keep looking to the upside.